Welcome to Breakthrough Success. I'm your host, Mark Gabberty, the content marketing expert, bringing you 5 new episodes every week where I and top-level guests teach you how to take your business to the next level and achieve your breakthrough. Hello, Breakthrough Success listeners. I just wanted you all to know before the episode actually starts, I've been working a little bit behind the scenes to give you something really special. So a while ago, I wrote my book, Content Marketing Secrets, which helps people create, promote, and optimize their content for growth and revenue. And I just put the finishing touches together to offer that for free to anyone who is interested. So if you want your free copy of Content Marketing Secrets, all you have to do is head over to markgabberty.com/book. Now, let's jump right into the episode. We all set goals for where our businesses want to be, where we see them being in the future, and some of these goals are personal, some of them are professional, but what if we could set big goals that get accomplished in 1 year? That is something that a lot of people want to do. They set New Year's resolutions. They set goals in the middle of the quarter. It's basically the whole idea is you get a goal done in 1 year, a big one that you've been after. So that's what we're going to focus on in this episode. And today's guest is a very great person to talk about with this topic because she actually went from a teen mom and college dropout in an abusive marriage to an 8-figure entrepreneur, world traveler, researcher, and author in the making. She's created the 1-year project to help people discover themselves and accomplish their big goals within 365 days. And in addition to that project, she also hosts the 1-year project podcast, where she helps listeners transform their lives. So today's guest for episode 227 of the Breakthrough Success Podcast is none other than Brianna Zajicek. Brianna, it is such a pleasure to have you on the show.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Mark. I'm excited to be a part of this. And I know that there are so many people out there looking for their breakthrough success. So I know that you're adding so much value. So I appreciate you having me on the show.
Brianna, I'm really looking forward to this show, and thank you for being on because I know that we're going to share a lot of value with everyone listening to this episode. So before we get into this whole idea of accomplishing our big goals we have in just 365 days, I'm wondering if you could give us some background. So can you share with us a little bit on why you started the 1-year project and what that journey has been like?
Sure, I'd love to. So the 1-year project started out as a personal journey. It was in late 2016. I began my research as a PhD, and I had just kind of exited some of the companies I was part of. And I was really thinking that the PhD was going to be the next thing for me. So as I started embarking on that journey, I loved my research, but I was really struggling to fit in. I was really struggling to follow the rules. I was really struggling in a lot of different ways. And I found myself in a position to where I woke up every day and I wasn't wanting to go do the things I had to do that day. I didn't want to respond to the emails. I didn't want to run the multiple $1-million companies I owned. I didn't want to attend the meetings. I didn't want to go to class. I just didn't want to do the things that I was supposed to want to do in life. And I was at the point where, I'd achieved almost everything I could have hoped to have achieved in such a short amount of time. Because as you mentioned, I'd gone from being a teen mom. I grew up very poor before that. We didn't even have running water or electricity a lot of times growing up. So I'd achieved a lot in a short amount of time. And I had the right house, and then I had the right marriage, and then I had beautiful children, and then I had an awesome car, and I traveled the world, and I went back and got a college degree, and all these things that happened that I thought were going to make me happy, make me feel successful, make me feel fulfilled. But I didn't feel that way. And so I really started out by saying, okay, what if I gave myself 1 year? What if I gave myself 1 year where instead of chasing what I think I want, because obviously I've been wrong in the past because I got everything I wanted and I still didn't feel happy, successful, fulfilled. What if I gave myself 1 year to figure it out? And what if that year I really removed all limitations, all restrictions, and figured out who I really was, what would actually make me feel the way I wanted to feel, and then how I was going to get there. And in the process, I turned myself into an experiment so that other people who want to do the same could do the same. So I took all of my research, which was on predicting entrepreneurial success. I'm a success researcher. And I took all of that research and really turned it into a system so that if you want to transform your life in 1 year, you can wake up tomorrow and you can actually know what to work on. Because I think a lot of people focus on mindset, or they focus on advice, or they focus on information and strategy of, how are you going to make the money, or how are you going to be successful? But I feel like the missing piece is action. Because as we consume all this advice and all this information, we can become more lost and more overwhelmed in, okay, well, what do I wake up tomorrow and do to get one step closer? So we all wake up and we have 18 things on our to-do list, and we maybe do 5 or 6 of them, or how many ever we can potentially do in that day. And then we're left in this state to where we don't really know if we move the needle one step closer to where we want to be in life. And that's where the 1 year project comes in. And that's how it all got started. It started from my own unhappiness and desire to transform my own life in just 1 year.
And it's interesting how you mentioned you had all these different things like the multi-million-dollar businesses, and how you still didn't feel that sense, but you felt like something was still missing, and you gave yourself a year to figure that out. And that's something we're going to go into a little more detail now. But I'd like for you to mention how you were able to grow the companies you grew and achieve the level of success you achieved with those companies, because you mentioned how you had grown those companies and you were doing all these other things. And I like to get a little deeper insight into that, because being able to grow just a 7-figure company, let alone multiple, that's something that a lot of listeners would want to know more about.
Sure. So I'll give you guys a story. When I first wanted to transform my life back even before that, when I was a teen mom, I got to the point where I said, okay, whatever industry I'm in right now, at the time I was a server, I was just working at restaurants, was just making minimum wage, not even minimum wage, I think I was making $3 an hour. And I said, okay, at the time I was going to school to be a civil engineer. But what I realized was that most civil engineers starting out make about $50,000 per year, which isn't a ton of money. And then I also realized that it's a very bureaucratic environment, and where you spend 5 years verifying equations, and 5 years checking someone else's work, and 5 years reviewing other people's drafts. And by the time I was 50, I get to do something. So I thought to myself, I said, okay, I need fast change. Where's an industry where a young kid who has no college degree who's smart, can actually make a mark, and people will let them make a mark if they actually have the skills and talent? So that was the question I asked myself. And by asking the right question, I was led down the right path. So I asked myself that question, and then I came up with the answer, which was that technology is really one of the only careers or fields or industries right now where someone can come in as a college dropout or a high school dropout or as anything really. And as long as they create something people want, they can be successful. So that was where I started. I started that I needed to find an industry that respected young people, because I was a young person. And that was the basis of my premise. So I went out and I applied to 100 jobs a day, 100 technology jobs a day for 100 days. That was my goal. And a lot of people say, okay, well, you couldn't code, you couldn't do this, you couldn't do that. And the truth is I couldn't. So what did I do? I applied for admin assistant jobs at the top 100 technology companies in my city. And by doing that, I got an interview. And when I got the interview, and I didn't even know what job I basically applied for, because I'd applied to multiple in the same company. So I was interviewing for a job, but I didn't know what job. When I got in there, I formed a bond with the CEO to where I said, what are your problems? What are your issues? What's going wrong in your company? And I convinced him that I could solve them. And then I would work my normal job all day, which was just a simple secretarial job to where I was booking travel. And then around 9-10 p.m., I would stay late and I would start working in other departments. I'd ask the people in those departments to stay after and have a meeting with me. And I would work probably until 2 or 3 a.m., still at the office, fixing whatever problem was in that department. And so the biggest thing that took me there is really, I would say, common sense and logic more than anything, because I didn't really know how to fix those departments. I wasn't a guru in finance, but I fixed the financial issues of the company. I wasn't a guru in recruiting or human resources, but I fixed the human capital issues in that company. I wasn't a guru in sales, but I fixed the sales issues in that company. So how did I do all of that? Is I would just go in and I'd really assess the state of things from just a common sense point of view. So if there's financial problems, then I want to know, who are we billing and how much are we billing them? And in investigating that, I uncovered some other things which made sense why we were having cash flow issues. And then I could move into the recruiting department and say, okay, who are we hiring and how are we hiring them? Okay, that led me to some reasons why we might not be able to hire as many people as we need to hire. And I really just went department by department, issue by issue, and took the most basic common sense approach you could possibly take to figure things out. And I'll give a great example of that. One time we were I was in the recruiting department. I was trying to turn it around. And our goal was to hire 40 people a month. And we were struggling at the time. The company was struggling to hire 10 or 12 people a month. So what I figured out was I said, okay, walk me through what you do. I was asking the recruiters, I said, walk me through what you do. Walk me through how a typical day goes. And what I figured out was from the time someone applied to the job to they got the offer was about 45 days. Now, any decent candidate who we want to extend an offer to is not going to go 45 days without a job. That's a long time. So what was happening is they call them and then they send them an email and then they give them the second call, a week later, and they schedule the third call for a week later. They'd schedule the final call for a week later. And along the way, they were losing all the good candidates. So sometimes, you don't have to be an expert in something. And I think that was one of the key principles I carried with me everywhere I went, is that I'm not the expert, but I'm smart enough to figure out any problem if I really need to figure it out. And that's how I approached everything. And that's how I started with the first company. And I worked that company. I ended up becoming the vice president of that company and going from 6 million to 40 million. And then after that, I built and sold several companies of my own. And that was really the premise for everything I did. I never knew the industry. I never had the expertise. I never had superior skills. Some might say I'm talented in that I'm fairly intelligent, but there's plenty of other fairly intelligent people out there as well. And they don't have multiple $1 million companies. So I think for me, it was really just the fearlessness to dive into any situation and a firm belief that I could solve any problem I encountered. And that probably came from my childhood, because my childhood, I had a lot of problems, but I managed to overcome that and I managed to solve all of those problems. So why couldn't I solve these problems?
Brianna, I really love the insights that you shared. And one of the best ways to learn is by doing. Like, you become an expert by just getting into that habit of creating the content or doing research. But a lot of the, you reach that expert level by taking the action. So no expert ever starts as an expert, but you definitely get there with all of the hard work. So with that said, I would like to transition now back to the main part of this episode, that whole idea of we set a goal, we get it accomplished within a year. And it is a big goal that we accomplish within 1 year. I know you gave yourself a year to figure things out. So I'm wondering if you could share with us, like, a lot of people have this big goal that they want to accomplish. How can we accomplish big goals, like really big ones, like a 6-figure or 7-figure, or just like things in our life, like having a better balance and any kind of big goal in just 1 year?
So what I was saying was that, people will come to me with goals all the time, and they might come to me with a goal that is, I want to get in the best shape of my life this year. And I really can't help them achieve that goal, because when am I going to be able to say definitively they're in the best shape of their life? Like, that's not something you can work towards. But if they told me I want to run the Boston Marathon and have an X minute mile, now that's something we can take and run with. And there's a difference in the quality of goals you set. So it all starts with, I guess, setting the right goal. And in order to set the right goal, there's a process that I go through, which is one, you have to figure out who you are and what your core motivations are. So are you looking for respect? Are you looking for connection? What are you looking or hoping? What feelings are you hoping to satisfy by accomplishing this goal? Because no matter what goal you have, there's something you're trying to satisfy internally. So identifying that core motivation, figuring out what does it look like if you were to wrap that core motivation into everything you do every single day. And then figuring out, what does that your vision for life look like? And then from there, we can say, okay, maybe you have 10 or to 12 different dreams. Maybe you want to give a TED talk. Maybe you want to be a best-selling author. Maybe you want to have a, huge podcast. Maybe you want to make X million dollars per year. And you can look at all these different goals, and you have to be able to narrow your focus and pick just one. And you start with the one, which I call is the tipping point goal. And what that looks like is, what is one goal out of all the goals you have that if you accomplished it, it would automatically make each of the other goals you have that much easier to accomplish. And so you pick your tipping point goal, whether that's, okay, well, if I were a best-selling author, then I would be able to sell more things, and I'd be able to get more speaking engagements, and I'd be able to have a better podcast. Or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe you start with the podcast, or maybe it's the opposite. You start with the course, or like whatever it is for you, because it's going to be different for each person. You pick your tipping point goal, and you chart it out over 90 days. And when you chart it out over 90 days, I always give one action to do per day. And then the hardest part of all of this, of accomplishing anything, is the waking up each day and doing one action. And a lot of times we overcomplicate everything. And I'll give you an example. Right now with my podcast, I have a single 90-day goal of getting 500 5-star reviews. And that is a huge goal. Very few people launch their podcast and get 500 reviews in the first 90 days. But I was able to reverse engineer that and say, well, how many 5-star reviews would I need per day? And then I could say, okay, well, I'm going to need, 5 or 6 or how many ever 5-star reviews per day. Okay, so how many people do I have to reach out to or speak to get that many reviews? And then I was able to say, okay, if I spoke to 60 people per day, one-on-one, whether that's in person or through LinkedIn or through Facebook or through my friends and family, if I could get in contact with 60 people per day, I'm pretty sure I could get 1 out of every 10 of them to leave me a 5-star review. So what does my 90-day plan look like to get 500 5-star reviews? It looks like talking to 60 people per day and seeing if they're willing to give me a 5-star review, if they're willing to listen, rate, and review my podcast. And so a lot of times we make things very, very complicated. We say, hey, I want 500 5-star reviews, or I want this huge podcast. So what you're doing is you're trying to get interviews on other podcasts, and you're trying to give a free giveaway on your Instagram, and you're trying to get PR, and you're hiring a PR person, and you're hiring a social media person. And we make it so complicated that, one, it's very expensive, and two, we're working in 15 different directions with a ton of different tasks and can't really narrow down any one of them to a direct impact. As where usually you can really get down to a single action per day that will significantly move the needle forward. And that's how granular I get.
And I really like hearing you explain that. Like it's like, it makes so much sense. It's like the more tasks that you give yourself, you have to decide which of those tasks to do. Like there are so many ways to get more reviews for podcasts, but as you mentioned, Brianna, just like contacting 60 people per day and breaking it down to a science with the reverse engineering, like there are, again, so many ways to do it, but just focusing on that one approach, that one tactic, I see that making a really big difference. And I'm sure that you've been able to see that big difference as well. And one of the things that I want to ask is, this is a rare situation. I don't remember the question I'll ask. I'm sure I'll remember it pretty soon. So one of the things that I also want to cover is like when people set big goals for themselves, One of the things is like they set the big goal. For some of them, it feels really distant because like maybe they haven't accomplished it in a while. So I'm wondering, what do you believe holds most people back from accomplishing their goals? And just to add a little more to that, accomplishing their big goals in just 1 year.
So let's say you have a big goal of a best-selling book, and that seems super far-fetched for you, right? And so if you set that foundation that it seems far-fetched or you're not quite sure you believe it can happen, then you're going to have a lot more excuses, and you're basically allowing yourself to have a lot of reasons when it doesn't happen to say why it didn't happen. And a lot of times it's because we think it's a lot more complicated than it is, and we don't keep it simple. So we think, oh, well, I need an email list of 10,000 people, and I need an Instagram of 10,000 people, and I need to be an Entrepreneur Magazine, and then I'll be able to have a best-selling book. But that's not necessarily always the case. And so, what I say, and it's interesting, is if you broke it into 90-day segments, you might start off with, well, what do best-selling authors do? Like, that's a great question to ask. Well, if they're a best-selling author, and if you want to be a good writer, then you have to write. So what if your single daily action was, I'm going to write 500 words per day every single freaking day for 90 days? I'm going to read 500 words. I'm going to write 500 words. Now, you might not be able to quantify how that impacts you writing a bestseller, but in the process of writing and producing this content, you're going to have to put it somewhere, which is going to help you build an audience. You're going to get better at writing. You're going to read other great pieces of work, which is going to influence when you do start writing your book. And so, if you want to be an author, if you want to be a writer, then you need to write every day. If you want to be a dancer, you need to dance every day. And so sometimes we make things super complicated. But I think just starting with the foundation of, what does someone who's successful or someone who's good at this do every day? And if you could just start with something so elementary, that will give you it will remove the imposter syndrome. Instead of you seeming like a person who's not an author or not a writer trying to be an author, you're going to seem like someone who is a writer being a writer. And once you can make that mindset shift, maybe over the first 90 days, then you're going to be in a great position to say, okay, now my second set of 90 days, I'm going to build an email list of, 1,000 people. Well, I need, 100 people a day or 10 people a day, or what does that look like? And how many people, how am I going to get them? And, that's the sort of thing you would work on. And then you might go in the third 90 days and say, well, I need to write my book. And then the final 90 days, you might need to market your book every day. And it's going to change and get more specific. But it's a really great example of always start with the foundation. If I want to be a millionaire, then how can I do the things that millionaires do? So you might not have $1 million, but could you wake up at 5 a.m.? Could you read a book every single day of your, could you read books instead of watching TV? So you really just reverse engineer who you want to become. And you say, what do these people do every day? Well, then that's what you need to do every day.
Brianna, I really like the breakdown. Again, that reverse engineering is something that is very powerful, and doing daily habits that lead you towards that goal, like doing things millionaires would do, doing things like successful authors would do. So I really like the insights there, and a lot of it does come back to the mindset and the that question that I blanked out on. It did come back to me. So one of the things that I meant to ask is, you have these multi-million-dollar companies, you have enough revenue where you could very easily delegate tasks within your brand, like for like the small business owner, maybe they're scheduling their own tweets. You may not necessarily have to do that if you don't want to, but you could delegate. So what is someone like you who is an 8-figure entrepreneur, like, what are you doing within your day to move the business forward? Because I know, like, once you reach a certain level, like the tasks and the workflow look very different from when you're just starting out and you have everything under, like, you're responsible for like all of the work.
I think there's a lot of different answers to this. Some people will tell you that things happen one way, that 8-figure entrepreneurs run their way one day. But I always like to say the one thing I do is I operate in my zone of genius every day. And so that'll be different for each different entrepreneur. But for me, I operate in the zone of genius of creating plans to make things happen. And so I create strategies, and then I manage teams and so that they can execute on my strategy. That's, I mean, at the biggest level, that's the one thing I do. The second thing I would say I do is I form human connections. I form relationships with people. No one else can walk in the room and be Brianna for me. No one else can go and make the relationships that are going to change my life and my business forever for me. And so if I had to tell you to work in two different areas of your business as the next level entrepreneur, it would be that I remove myself from the details. So I'm not paying the invoices. I'm not setting up the times. I'm not, getting screenshots of reviews. I'm not doing any of those things. Those are the things other people can do. But what other people can't do is create $100 million strategy. I mean, basically what I said was that no one can form the relationships that I can form. No one can walk in a room and be me. And no one can form the strategy for a $100 million company and then drive a team and people on how to execute that strategy. And so that's really the zone of genius that I work in, is forming the relationships, which will take my life and business to the next level, and then creating the strategy and leading the team to execute on it.
And that is one of the big themes I see as you entrepreneurs become more successful. Like, entrepreneurs at their heart are decision makers, and that is the difference between working in your business versus working on your business. So I really like the idea of getting all the details delegated, and then being able to focus on the decisions, being able to focus on the strategy, and building those relationships. The things that you cannot delegate are the things that you are focusing on, and you're delegating the rest. So I really do like that approach. And you mentioned earlier, embodying a millionaire, reverse engineering to do their habits and embrace them. And one of the things you mentioned was reading books. And this is something that I hold, this is something that I do very often to build up my knowledge. So with that in mind, I'm wondering if you could share with us 3 great books that you believe will have a positive impact on us.
I like 48 Laws of Power is one of my favorite books. Besides that, I love Peter Thiel's 0 to 1. And then the third book is The One Thing. And The One Thing, I'm going to go a little bit deeper on that. The One Thing is about focus. And that's at the core of everything I do, is I'm only ever working towards one thing, and I'm only ever working on one thing. And because of that, I can achieve anything very, very, very quickly, as where even the best of podcasters, it might take them 2-3 years to get 500 reviews. I can get it done in 90 days. And the reason why is because I'm only moving towards one target. So I learned that concept of how our mind works. And as an AI researcher, that's something that I've learned, cognitive science researcher. I've mirrored that in a lot of other ways. The One Thing is a huge book on that. Peter Thiel's 0 to 1, even after I was a very successful entrepreneur and had sold multiple companies, I read Peter Thiel's 0 to 1 book. And there were insights that I hadn't quite been able to vocalize yet, or put a thought around, but I might have internally or subconsciously known pieces and parts of. And that book pulled it all together for me about how to go from being a good company to being a world changer. And that's very important to me. So that was kind of a very good book for me. And the 48 Laws of Power is a good, quick read in that just learning how power operates and what's the principles behind it can change you to be more powerful. And if you can stand in your own power and exert that in positive ways to impact the world, then you're going to do great things.
Brianna, thank you for sharing with us those great book recommendations. Those will all be in the show notes, marketbirdie.com/E227. We will also throw in content marketing secrets over at marketbirdie.com/book in the show notes as well for anyone interested in growing their content brands. And before we wrap up this episode, Brianna, I've asked you several questions throughout our time together, but what do you believe is one question that we need to be asking ourselves more often?
How am I going to leave the world different than when I entered it?
Brianna, that is a really great question. Thank you for sharing. It's something we should constantly think about because we have that impact that we create. And I feel like we need to continue reminding ourselves of that because it's better to remind yourself, and that helps you work more effectively than it is to not remind yourself of that and then realize towards the end. So thank you for sharing that great question, all of your great insights throughout our time together. If you guys want to learn more about Brianna, check out the 1 Year Project podcast. That will be in the show notes. Again, markroberti.com/E227. But Brianna, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to come on the show and sharing your great insights with us.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark, so much for having me. It's been quite a pleasure, and I look forward to your continued success.
How does over 100 retweets per day sound to you? My free ebook, 27 Ways to Get More Retweets on Twitter, has you covered. I use the methods within this ebook to get over 10,000 retweets every single quarter. To learn